All right, welcome back everyone. Matt here with a quick discussion of the topic of externalities today. And I want to talk with you a little bit about what an externality is, how we represent an externality in a supply and demand diagram, and use that information to help us say something about the outcomes that are going to exist in a market where there are externalities, and maybe even talk a little bit about possible solutions that we might be able to propose to solve the problems that we're going to discuss here. So again, our topic today is this thing called an externality. And all that an externality is simply a cost or a benefit that goes to someone other than the buyers and sellers in a particular market. For example, if you're thinking about painting your house, so I don't know what my rendition of my house, and it's hasn't been painted now in a couple years. It's starting to look a little bit weathered, and so I'm thinking about maybe doing a little bit of work and painting my house. So maybe I decide I'm going to paint it this nice purple color, and if I do that, assuming that other people like the nice purple color, my neighbors and so on, I get some benefit from this paint job, right? Because I get to look at my freshly painted and very happy looking purple house here. My neighbors, assuming that they also are pleased with the purple color, get to enjoy some benefits as well. And those extra benefits that my neighbors enjoy are not captured if I think about the market for getting my house painted. So if I decide that I'm going to have someone come and paint my house, I'm going to end up making a decision based on whether or not I should or shouldn't do that, or the way that I should do it, based on my own private benefits. But what I really should be potentially thinking about, or maybe what we think that the market in general should be thinking about, are not just the benefits that accrue to me as the homeowner, but those that accrue to everybody else. So there are lots of examples of goods that have these kinds of properties. Public education is another good one. So if we assume that having the population educated, at least up to some basic level, that's primarily a justification then for possibly using some public funding. Even if I don't have a child who's currently engaged in education, I'm better off and you're better off if the population as a whole is well educated. And so it might make sense for me, even if I didn't have a child of school age, to contribute via my taxes or something like that in order to generate those benefits, in order to capture those benefits. So let's talk a little bit about this case. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to start by just drawing a supply and demand picture of what the market would look like if we have a case of a positive externality. So that's a benefit that exists to someone outside of the transaction. So in this particular case, I'm just going to draw a pretty simple upward sloping supply curve, and that's going to describe the costs associated with painting my house or providing public education or whatever. This, of course, is quantity down here on the horizontal axis and price on the vertical axis. I'm going to draw in blue then, well, maybe I'll draw it in purple since we're talking about painting my house purple. So let me draw in purple the benefits that are going to accrue to me as the homeowner. And I'm going to label this demand, and I'm going to write private. So this is the amount of benefit, the marginal benefit, if you will, that accrues to me as the homeowner. Now the issue, of course, is that these benefits, which accrue to me as measured by this purple demand curve, that doesn't capture all of the benefits. There's some benefits, now we'll use the blue color here. There's some benefits that accrue to society as a whole, and so I'm going to draw those in here. And I'm going to call that the marginal social benefit curve. And the marginal social benefit curve, and we'll see the same thing on the cost side a bit later on, is going to be the combination of, oops, not that, that's not right, hold on. There we go. The marginal social benefit is my marginal private benefit, that's my demand curve, plus the externality, any external benefits that accrue to my neighbors from having my house painted this nice, awesome purple color. So if we think about what the market is going to do, if we don't have a way to account for these benefits, we know that they exist, but we don't have a way to get them into the market transaction, and I'm just left to make my own decisions, my own choices about painting my house, then it's my marginal private benefit along with the supply of getting my house, the supply curve associated with getting my house painted, that's going to determine my optimal choice. We'll put a P on here for private, and that's going to be the equilibrium where the market is going to settle in the absence of any correction for this externality. So we're going to be here. The real issue, of course, is that we'd like to be here. We'd like to find a way to account for all of these private benefits. And in fact, this equilibrium quantity, what should we call this? Put an S on it for social, does include not just my private benefits, but all these benefits that accrue to my neighbors and so on. If we're thinking about public education, for example, the private benefit would be the one that would accrue to an individual family or to an individual child who's being educated, and the difference between the purple line and the blue line accounts for the fact that the rest of society is better off if kids spend time in school. So what we notice is that we end up with a private amount, the market outcome, that falls short of the socially optimal outcome. In fact, maybe we should put a label on this little point right here. And so in a lot of cases, you'll see this called the social optimum. So it's the best outcome if we could somehow account for all of these costs and all of these benefits. Now we can use the idea of deadweight loss, which we've seen in previous work, to help us understand what's going on here. And the problem is that when we fall short, when quantity falls short, that we end up with a efficiency loss, a deadweight loss in the amount of this area right here. So we're not able to capture all of these benefits, and so we end up with a loss of economic welfare, a loss of surplus, a loss of efficiency. So that's the case of a positive externality that we've drawn here. That's one where there's a benefit that does not get completely captured. And in just a moment, I will clear off the screen here and tell you the same story with regards to a negative externality. All right, so moving on now to talk about the case of a negative externality. So a negative externality is a situation in which there's a cost associated with the production and consumption of a particular good, and a cost that's not captured in the market transaction. That is, the cost is borne in part by individuals who are outside of the market transaction. So the very, very classic case we might think of here is an example of some kind of pollution. So for example, if you have a big factory in your town, in Bellingham here, there used to be a large paper mill down at the waterfront, and it generated pollution of various kinds. The most obvious one to the citizens of Bellingham was a sort of nasty smell that would sort of drift around, particularly if the wind was from a particular direction. There were other kinds of pollution, pollutants that got dumped into the water and things like that. So the paper mill made various products, but one of the things that they made was they made toilet paper. Now, we would all agree that toilet paper is a pretty important product for us to have access to, so we'd like there to be a market that will provide toilet paper. The problem is that in the toilet paper market, there are costs associated with the production of toilet paper that are not captured in the market transaction. So I'm going to start by here talking about the market for TP, and there's some demand curve for toilet paper. And there's some benefits. We don't need to go into the details. There's some benefits to having this market exist. In addition to the benefits on the cost side, and this is where the externality is going to come in, on the cost side, we're going to have a supply curve which is going to capture the private cost. And so I'm just going to call it this time, I'm going to call it MPC for marginal private cost. And the marginal private cost is effectively the marginal cost curve or the supply curve for the toilet paper producing firm. So that's the one in red. In addition to that, in blue, we'll draw a different curve, an additional curve here that's going to capture the marginal social cost, which, as we saw in the positive case, is a combination of the private costs associated with producing the good and the externality. So we have this external cost that we need to account for, and we should think a little bit about what the market outcome is going to look like. So in this particular case, with a negative externality, the market is going to want to go here. That's where the private outcome will occur. The social optimum, the optimal amount of toilet paper, is here. And what we notice, and we can just talk primarily about the quantity effect, what we notice is that we get overproduction in the private case. So this is going to be the market outcome out here, Q star P, and the socially optimal outcome, Q star S, is smaller than that. So if we don't account for this external cost, we get overproduction in toilet paper. And we generate an efficiency loss, a deadweight loss, much as we did before. It's kind of on the other side this time. It is this area, right? So we end up producing a bunch of rolls of toilet paper that we really shouldn't produce if the market were able to fully account for all of these costs, including these pollution costs and so on, that aren't currently being accounted for. Now, one important point to notice about this outcome is that this social optimum right here is not zero. So it's very tempting in the case of pollution in particular to say, oh, pollution's very bad. Okay, pollution's bad. Therefore, we should do everything we can to reduce pollution as far as possible. Maybe, in fact, to try and eliminate pollution altogether. And the problem with that perspective is that it ignores the fact that there are benefits associated with some of the goods that are involved in creating pollution. And so it's not as simple as just saying we should get rid of all pollution. Rather, we should think about comparing the benefits and the costs of having toilet paper, which is a pollution-producing good, certainly, or any other consumer goods that we might decide to choose, in a way that accounts for this externality. That's really the key thing. So we'll find out in the case of toilet paper, for example, that having zero toilet paper, which is the only way to have zero pollution associated with production of toilet paper, turns out maybe not to be such a good strategy. Should we have a little bit less? Should we be a little bit more careful in the way that we use it? Will the price be higher if we account for all these pollution costs? Definitely, all those things are true. But it doesn't necessarily mean that we should be aiming for zero pollution. So that's the case of a negative externality. The last thing that I'd like to talk about, I think I can even just squeeze it in here, no need to clear off the screen again, is to talk about the range of possible solutions to externality problems. So the kinds of things that we might imagine could be done to help solve a problem like this negative externality. And they're going to range from the most sort of heavy-handed you can imagine, where you require some sort of government agency to step in and simply regulate the production, say, of toilet paper. So it's direct regulation. We can imagine that we could use taxes, possibly as a way to solve the pollution problem. So up here, for example, if the externality is represented by this vertical distance between these two things, between these two curves, right? So this is the amount of the externality, this distance right here. Then if we set a tax equal to that same distance that the producer has to pay, it would shift the marginal private curve up until it lies right on top of the marginal social curve. So that would be a possibility. There are other sort of less heavy-handed options. One that's currently sort of in vogue and gets different amounts of attention from the various political parties at different points in time are examples of different kinds of systems that would involve tradable permits. So you would decide, oh, this is how much toilet paper we want, this is the optimal amount, and you would issue production permits, or maybe pollution permits, either way, that would cap the amount of pollution and the amount of production at Q star S. This is essentially the cap and trade sort of thing that you hear talked about from time to time. in the political sphere. And then the kind of most free market kind of approach, one that is interesting from a theoretical perspective, I'm not sure how practical it would be, is simply one that involves assigning property rights. And this is sometimes referred to as the Coase theorem, after its originator, a man by the name of Ronald Coase, who was an economist at the University of Chicago for many, many years, very, very famous guy. And what Coase said is, look, the problem with externalities is that there simply aren't clearly defined property rights. So if we think about our pollution problem here, the reason that we have pollution of the air around Bellingham from the toilet paper factory is that no one owns the air. So perhaps we could assign property rights for the air, and then if you want to pollute in the air, you need to pay the owner of the clean air in order to do so. So that approach, whether we literally assign property rights to an individual, or maybe we think of it as public property that then needs to be managed by a government agency, that sort of approach will eventually clean up externalities by virtue of the fact that the owner of the air will want to keep it at the optimal level of cleanliness, which may or may not involve zero pollution, probably does not involve zero pollution, but involves an optimal amount of pollution. So that's about it for this lesson on externalities. Hopefully you got a little bit of something out of it, and you can get the rest of the details from your reading in the text. All right, thanks. Talk to you soon.